This is Contra,
where we go back and forth about films.
I'm Dakota Arsenault.
And I'm Rachel Ho.
On today's episode, we are looking at the Toronto Japanese Film Festival. The TJFF is now celebrating its 10th iteration, showcasing the best contemporary Japanese films, usually getting their Canadian or North American premieres. Rachel and I watched a bunch of the films that were selected for the festival, but we know we couldn't go it alone. So we've invited back to the show our resident Japanese film and culture expert, Naomi Wada Platt, who was last heard on episodes 141 and 143, celebrating Japanese cinema, a two-part series where we looked at both live-action and animated films. She is here to share her insight, contextualize the films we watched, and correct any accidentally mispronounced names. Welcome back, Naomi. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me again.
Of course, it's absolutely our pleasure, and I was really excited to be able to do this with you.
And I'm excited to talk about Japanese film with you and Rachel.
I know you love talking about Japanese movies.
Yeah, and basically should talk about them. Contemporary ones. I like the classics.
Of course. So I guess I'll pose the question to the two of you. Was this the first time you attended the TJFF, and sort of what were your thoughts on either the programming selection and the overall quality of the festival? Rachel, we'll start with you.
Yeah, it's my first time doing the Toronto Japanese Film Festival. I'll be honest, I didn't even know it existed until this year. I really liked the I guess the logistics behind how the festival actually ran. Like, I thought their website was really, really easy to use. And in terms of the programming, I found quite a few films that I was really interested in. A lot of titles that I thought were quite unique, especially ones that dealt with, we'll get into it later, obviously, but ones that dealt with like Yakuza centered movies. Because we don't get those too much in terms of Hollywood, which is a good thing. But yeah, it was my first time and I really enjoyed it. Naomi, I assume that you knew that this existed before I did.
Yes, this is actually my second TJFF. The first time I'd been to was back in 2016. I went to see a movie about Sugihara Tune, Senpo Sugihara. This Japanese, he was the ambassador who helped a bunch of Jews. And I went to see it because I'm Jewish, I'm Japanese, so Sugihara Tune is someone that I really respect, and they made a movie about it. So I actually dragged my mom, who was visiting me from Japan, and she fell asleep while watching the movie.
Oh.
Yeah, but there was actually a lot of Jewish community members in the theater at Toronto Japanese Cultural Center near Eglinton. So that was a really good memory, and I actually got to talk to the director after the screening. So I always had, soft spot for this film festival, and to go back again, it was a really pleasant experience. And I agree with you, Rachel. Their website is really neat. Like, it's kind of better than TIFF. So
1,000 times better than TIFF.
Shade, but true. So yeah, that was a good surprise.
Dakota, how'd you like it?
Yeah, it was my first time as well. I'm not too sure if I'd heard of it before or not, but I found it last year when I was sort of looking around to find different film festivals to try to get coverage for this podcast. And it stuck out for me that it was a festival that was basically importing new Japanese films that, it sort of seems that like in the international cinema realm, outside of the North America, you're kind of limited to maybe about half a dozen to a dozen films that get noticed throughout like the major ways of watching movies. And so that's obviously a huge shame on a lot of us of not being able to like really see what contemporary cinema is happening in different countries and cultures and things like that. And so this one really sort of stuck out to me as this is like the only real opportunity for the average person to see mainstream Japanese films. I'm sure, Naomi, you probably know ways of either obtaining access to different Japanese films or what have you, whether it's, some small theater is having a screening or ways to import and stuff like that. But for the most part, just completely off of our radar. And for me, it's the same case. And so it was exciting to be able to watch movies from a a country that has such a rich cinema history to it and be able to kind of explore and see some different stuff. Like, other than someone like Koreeda, I don't really know a ton about contemporary Japanese films. Like, obviously everyone knows about Kurosawa and Ozu and stuff like that. And even, the Studio Ghibli stuff, which they're still producing films. But outside of Koreeda or even Takeshi Miike, I can't think of any other contemporary Japanese director. So it really is like me trying to fill a blind spot.
And I think it's quite good too, in terms of like, there's obviously a ton of movies that will come out in Japan, and having a festival like this, it's nice because they kind of curate it down to a handful of films so you can focus it a little bit more. Whereas if you just thought, I want to watch like a contemporary Japanese movie, there's just so many out there that it's going to be a bit overwhelming. So that's why I think film festivals are great in that sense of being able to like hone in on things that at least TJFF thought was worthy of including into their programming. So, that kind of helps a bit with the work. And then maybe you find a couple actors that you're really interested in, or directors, and then you kind of go out and branch out that way. So it's a great starting point for anybody who just wants to get into Japanese film, or, any other film festival as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think overall, I was very impressed with like the actual quality of all the films. Like, I didn't like all of them, but that's sort of besides the point, where sometimes you can attend a film festival and a lot of the films will seem very, to put it nicely, I guess, student film-like, where the production value isn't very high and all that sort of stuff. And even the movies I didn't care for, you can't deny that they were very polished films in terms of the quality of, post-production and sound editing and color grading and all that sort of stuff, where, you sort of come to expect with mainstream cinema. And so I really appreciate that. And I'll echo both of your sentiments of the website was absolutely terrific. I loved how either everything was like in one row, you can find it there, or then they kind of broke it down by genre, whether it was by drama, by comedy, family friendly, by women directors, documentary, that sort of stuff. So that way, if you wanted to kind of go in a different direction, exactly what avenue to take. Because that's the other thing. If I was to be like, hey, recommend me a contemporary Japanese film, Japanese is a language. It's not a genre. So, what if I, don't want, a bloody Yakuza movie? What if I want something that I can laugh at, or, something that's just like a light drama or what have you, a romance. So it's nice that they kind of broke it down by genre too. And it was such a clean portal where I really have to commend them for that too.
It's also a really good call for all the other film festivals to like step up their game. Specifically TIFF. I'm calling TIFF out right now.
Yeah.
They need to, like, for one of the largest film festivals in the world, they really need to get their website together and their ticketing process together, like the catalog together. Like, they just need to, they have the money for it. So I was going to
say,
they have the resources.
Right? Like, our money that we spend on the, membership and the tickets, like, where are they going, TIFF? Hello?
Honestly, yeah. Like, where does it go, actually? Let's not get into, like, nailing TIFF on this. But I'm just saying that a lot of other film festivals, like Cinefest in Sudbury, like, they had a great website. And I know that they're not dealing with as many films or as much traffic as TIFF will. And I'm sure this film festival kind of falls under that same umbrella. But they still are able to create a great website that is very user-friendly, with the resources that they have that can manage the traffic that they're expecting. And I don't see why TIFF can't do the same thing.
All right. Well, I think we should talk about some of the movies. There was 3 films in particular that at least 2 of us saw, but we're going to start with the one that all 3 of us saw. And I don't know if this is the best one to start with, but it's the one we're going to start with. It's called School Meals Time, Final Battle. And Naomi, please make sure you correct me if I do any incorrect pronunciations on names. It was directed by Shinya Ayabe.
私は給食が好きだ。給食のために学校に来てると言っても過言ではない。しかし、そんなことを生徒に悟られてはならない。そんな私に挑戦状を叩きつけた男、神の号。
So I'll give a very brief plot synopsis of this movie. It's basically a young man is a teacher at a middle school where his favorite part of the day is the school lunches that they provide, and he talks about how he probably became a teacher for the free school lunches. And there's these gorgeous, beautiful Japanese lunches that just make your mouth water the whole time, and he's obsessed with eating them in the most perfect manner. But then somehow another student also loves lunches as much as he does. but he takes creative approaches to eating them. And then later on, throughout the movie, find out through budget cuts, they plan on eliminating the school meal plan. And so the teacher and the student, which have philosophical differences on how to eat their lunches, decide to basically try to work together to figure out how they can, if possible, reverse these budget cuts to keep the school lunches in the system. This is, I guess, for all intents and purposes, a young adults, children's, teen sort of film. It's a very light comedy drama with some very ridiculous antics that are involved. So I'm trying to keep that in mind when the fact that I didn't really care for it, that maybe I'm not the target audience. But I don't know, Rachel, I know you wrote about this one. I think you might be the most positive about the three of us, and maybe that's stretching it a little bit. What were your thoughts on this film?
All right, before you guys get into ripping apart this movie, I really liked it. I thought it's super silly, and like you said, it probably is meant for a younger audience, or just people like me who are not so young anymore, but we just kind of have it's a weird sense of humor. It's really silly. That's probably the best word that I can use to describe it. But there is something within the silliness that it just really connected with me. I really liked the idea of using the school lunches as kind of your grounding, your focal point, because especially from our perspective here in Canada, I don't know about you guys, but I didn't have school lunches growing up. That wasn't a thing, in schools. We brought our own lunches. We didn't have anything funded by our school board. So I don't know if that's how it is in across the rest of Canada, but when I was growing up in Ontario, so I'd be 90s, early 2000s, we didn't have something like that. So for me, it was just the novelty of that as well. And I liked the kind of just the ridiculousness of it. And I think that it just spoke to me in a way that a lot of ridiculous movies speak to me. And I do think that there is actually a lot of heart in it, where the little boy he really believes in school lunches. He's really into creating them and making them into a way that is very different and the most optimal way to eat your school lunch. And that sounds really silly, but I like that creativity from this child. And then this part of the story too is he's running for student council, and with the whole backstory of the government shutting down the funding for the school lunches, it just kind of spoke to me in a way of this kid is in middle school, going into what we would consider high school here in Canada. And it's his innocence, in a sense, is being taken away because it's real world, real adult things are influencing his seemingly juvenile passion for school lunches, or just something that he associated with as being in school. And then I also, they had a little theme at the end of it's about community, and it's about, who you eat your lunches with and the conversations that you have during that time and the bonding moments of that. And I like eating food with people. So it just, I don't know, it really spoke to me in that way. I'm probably reading way too much into it, and I'm taking it far more seriously than it needs to be, but I just really liked it. And I liked the silliness of it, some of the humor and some of the editing. It reminded me of some kind of old Hong Kong comedies that I watched when I was growing up, like Stephen Chow comedies in particular. So that also kind of threw me for a bit of a nostalgia bit.
Okay. Naomi, what are your thoughts on all of that?
So first of all, I grew up with Japanese school system. So watching those food, I just want to go back to elementary school and enjoy that food. It's so good. I miss it. And I actually want to bring this point out. So school lunch, I think, is available for public elementary school throughout Japan. My junior high school didn't have it, not in high school either. And I remember talking about innocence that Rachel brought up. Going into junior high, I was 12 or 13. So school lunch wasn't free, and people are supposed to pay, but some parents couldn't afford it. So there was a whole discussion across the nation of, well, what if those parents can't pay? Are we going to take lunch away from those kids? And as a kid, I'm I didn't know there such families existed, because my family was I could afford it. So I was so shocked, and that's when I realized, like, oh, there are people who can't afford to eat. So this movie kind of put me back in the situation a bit. But yeah, so some of the meals that I saw, actually sukiyaki, it's so different from my sukiyaki that I grew up with. So seeing that, community differences in food and everything, that was cute. But the editing and the comedy and the lighting, I if I can continue talking, I will just use bad words. So I'm gonna stop. But it was a bit cringy, and I really didn't like the background music. It was too much.
I would agree with that, actually. Yeah,
Right?
it was a little bit. It's a bit overwhelming, and it's a
Yeah.
little extra. But the whole movie is extra. That's the thing. Like, the whole movie is ridiculously extra.
It is extra, but like they could have taken it further. And Ichihara Hayato, the main actor, when I was a kid, I had a huge crush on him. He used to be this like typical bad boy. He used to only play typical bad boy characters. So to see him in that strict teacher in what, like, tie and the vest and dress shirt, I was like, what are you doing? Like, at first I didn't recognize him. So, and like he could have gone further. He could have go like 100,000 times weirder or like more comedic. And I think if he did that, I would have appreciated it a bit more. But it was cute, yes. But there are some elements that I was just like, yeah, this is Japanese comedy. I forgot. So there are some moments like that.
He's still very good looking, by the way.
Yeah,
just throwing it out there.
He is cute. Period.
He's still a very handsome man,
right? And speaking of the kid Goal, he's a good actor and he's cute. And I'm like, you're gonna grow up and you'll be prettier, and I can't wait to see you in your next work. That kind of thing. Yeah.
So I think for me, I feel like I'm kind of landing on the same pages as Naomi as far as your thoughts on sort of the over the topness. I think a lot of this movie is you need to kind of be on the wavelength that the film is trying to do, or you're just not going to really like any of it, which is fine. There were parts of it I liked, but the music was a little over the top. The narration, where he's kind of like doing that like quiet talk where he sounds like he's doing like an ASMR video. And then, so I think one of the things I had the biggest trouble with was the contrasting of the character, that he's such this rigid teacher. He's so strict, he forces one kid who speaks out of line to go out in the hallway and hold buckets of water up in the air as a punishment.
Corporal punishment. Yep.
Yeah. And then when like he's in the teacher's lounge, he's like getting mad at the teachers that you can't have an open-ended question, that sort of thing. And then you contrast that with when they're singing the school song, that he's literally bouncing up and down in the chair so hard, swinging his arms around, that he keeps hitting his hand on his desk every time he does it. Or like he jumps up on his desk on all fours and kicks his leg out like he's doing some sort of like yoga pose or something like that. And I'm like, this character does not mesh. These are two completely different characters, and they don't belong in the same world. And it was just like a little bit too much for me to kind of get on board with.
So on that note, I want to pose a question to you guys. Do you think that him acting out like that, like the dancing in his chair and the weird yoga-esque poses, do you think that was actually happening, or is that just something that's going on in his head, that he's doing it in his head, but in reality, he's just actually sitting there very proper?
I thought about that, and I kind of, in my Letterboxd review, I kind of talked about that a little bit, where at first I was like, what's he doing? And then later on I was like, oh, maybe it's sort of all in his head and this is the way he sort of views himself. But if that was the case, I don't think the director did a good enough job of doing that, because I noticed the second time that he was singing the school song, there were quite a few students staring at him and watching him on the other side of the room, not the ones like directly in front of him, like the young boy, that sort of thing. But there were some students that were staring at him, and that sort of made me sort of break that sort of fourth wall illusion of, is this all in his head sort of thing. So I don't know if it was the director's intention to make it ambiguous. I don't think they really succeeded. And I almost want to say, because of the fact that they a couple characters later in the movie, like when he goes into the principal's office and the principal reveals that the school meals are being cut. The principal says, well, we all know that you love school meals so much. And then the cafeteria workers also kind of imply that as well, that it's very obvious. So I don't quite know where they were trying to go with that, because I thought that exact same question too, and I don't know where I land on it.
Yeah, that's so fair, because I'm with you, Dakota, and I asked the same question, but I actually didn't. I asked this particular question like in the middle of the movie, because I grew up watching anime, and there's some, food anime that kind of does the same thing. So there's this anime that like people shed their clothes because it tastes so good.
What?
Yeah, there's nudity in the food show. Yeah, food anime. It's Japan's wild and weird.
Wait,
Anyways,
so the food is just so good that they strip?
yeah, they strip, and sometimes they like have this trip to, I don't know, like heaven or whatever. I will send you some gifs and articles afterward, but there's some nudities in the food reaction anime and whatever. So I'm so used to that. How bizarre it may sound, I have to admit that. So it's kind of like the typical comedy when it comes to food shows in Japan. People react over the top, and we just have to accept that. So I think the director is just like, no one's going to question if this is happening for real or not. So I think that's why the line wasn't drawn clearly. And I do think that it was happening in real life. And everyone's just like, well, he's doing the thing again. Okay.
Fair enough, actually. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point, though, because if he's doing this like literally every day, then the students wouldn't be phased by it at all. They'd just be like, yeah, there goes the good-looking teacher doing the thing again. Like,
but I don't want him as my teacher. No, thank you.
I would take him. I just don't need him to do the weird dancing and stuff like that. He could be my teacher. I have no problem with that.
Oh, but do you want the corporal punishment and his elitism and everything?
I was a good kid in school.
Oh, okay, so you'll be fine.
I think the one thing this movie does do really well, this is a movie about school lunches, and the food had to be key. And one thing I've absolutely noticed between, watching movies in this festival and the time that we did the series together, Naomi, watching celebrating the Japanese films, food in Japanese cinema is so key, and it always looks so damn good. I can't think of the amount of times where I'm watching a Japanese food and be like, oh man, I'm hungry. I know what I'm ordering tonight. I'm getting Japanese food. And like, especially they make a huge big deal about the first meal that they really show, where it's like fried whale with this Aurora sauce. And hot damn, if I wouldn't kill to order that while I was watching that, because it looked so good.
I know. I so wanted to book a flight back to Japan and just like sneak into elementary school and eat their food, steal their food. But I shouldn't be doing that. But no, seriously, Japanese school lunch, so good. I remember reading articles back in Japan saying like, apparently school lunches in North America is really shitty. Like they only give you apple and sandwiches, and here we have this, well-made food. And I felt bad for the students in North America.
Yeah.
You know what I actually wanted to say too was about the workers in the school lunches. I really liked that touch of kind of adding in, well, if, they might need to go get another job, and like how much pride they took in preparing the lunches and like coming up with different menus. I found that to be incredibly sweet. And I may or may not have teared up because of that.
Oh,
I don't know what happened to me that day, but I was feeling very emotional for the ladies who were making the lunches, and now they were out of a job. And I was like, sometimes, again, this is me taking the movie far beyond what it probably was intended to. But when you think of, these budget cuts and things like that, it affects a lot of things, not just a student and a teacher who really like their school lunches, but like there's real people behind decisions like that. And I really liked how they took time to address that, because I thought it added a lot of emotion to a very, again, silly movie.
no, it's true. Like we loved the ladies who made the school lunch. We call them kyushoku no obachan. So kyushoku is the school lunch, and obachans, ma'am. So we always called them and we always said hi, and they were always so sweet. I actually, yeah, like this film made me miss them a bit. I did interrupt, sorry, Rachel. But it was a cute moment for sure. And talking about, you know, politics and things, incorporating into this cute, silly comedic film, it was a good idea, and I think that element worked well.
Well, there we go. I think we should move on now to a different one. Going to talk about a movie called A Family, which only Rachel and I saw, which was directed by Michihiro Fuji.
親父のことは死んでも俺が守りますから。柴崎さんさ、時代はもう変わってきてるんだよ。
俺の弾でも取ってみるか。
親父危ない。こっちは大原殺されてんだぞ。
And so this is the story of a Yakuza family that takes place over 3 chapters from 1999 to 2019, each in a 10-year span. And it's about a young man named Kenji who falls in with the local Yakuza gang and ends up working his way up. And then in the middle section, he ends up taking the fall for one of his brothers in the gang and going to jail for a decade. And then it's the last chapter of him acclimatizing to life post-prison and what has changed for him in terms of what the gang has changed into and how laws in Japan have changed and all that sort of stuff. But it is sort of presented as sort of like a family drama done in the style of The Irishman, I guess would be the best way to kind of compare it. This is one I did really like. I thought the middle section kind of really dragged at times, but specifically both the first chapter and the third chapter were absolutely phenomenal. What about you, Rachel? What were your thoughts on this film?
Pretty much spot on with you. I really enjoyed the movie. I love gangster genre, like gangster genre across the world. I see the appeal. And I found this one to be really, like, there's not that much violence. There is violence, but not as much as we would assume there to be maybe in like a typical gangster movie that we're used to from Hollywood. This one really, really does focus on the family aspect of it, but it also draws on, there's 14, he got sent to prison for 14 years. And so the last chapter of the movie picks up in, post him being in jail. So 14 years has gone by and Japan's a very different world. And how the Yakuza are viewed in Japan is very different all of a sudden. It's no longer they fear you and, it's very, you're discriminated against. And they touch on that really nicely. I thought of, it's going to be tough for him to even get a cell phone plan, after coming out of prison because he is marked as being a member of the Yakuza. So I liked those kind of beats to the movie because it's looking at kind of gangster in society in a way that I don't know if we've really seen before. I think like Irishman is a great example of maybe a Western film that comes kind of close where, the end scenes in Irishman, it's, Robert De Niro's character thinking like, is all alone. And it's like, was it really worth it? And you get that same vibe with this movie. And actually to kind of connect it to the school lunches one, and something Naomi said was that the Ichihara Hayato, who played the very good looking school teacher, he's in this one as well. And he is in it as, he is Kenji's friend, and looks completely different. Like he is, I think he has a shaved head, and he is like a gangster basically. And so it was interesting when you said that, Naomi, like that's what he was kind of known for before doing the school lunches movie, but that he kind of returns to that, I suppose, in this movie. So I thought that was kind of cool seeing, because I watched these ones not back to back, but I think one day after the other, and seeing him as just an actor doing, a lead super silly, and then the gangster supporter role in a more typical movie. But I had no idea that that's what he was more known for in Japan.
Yeah. He's got depth.
Yeah. He's good too. He's a really good actor. I actually thought the actor who plays Kenji as well, whose name is, again, apologies if I mispronounce this, but Ayano Go, he was really great in this as well. And actually I want to shout out, there was one really cool kind of like oneer, like a good continuous shot when they were putting a hit on the Yakuza boss and he was in the car, and the way that the camera just follows Kenji around, I was really like, I think I stopped the movie and went back and rewatched it a few times just because I love when there's like really cool camera work like that. But yeah, I was a big fan of this movie. I didn't think that I did think, I agree with you, Dakota, that it did drag a little in the middle. But the beginning and then the payoff that you get at the end, to me, it's a really, really great movie.
Yeah, I think what worked best is Kenji's character arc is so clear and present. You understand exactly what's going on in all 3 chapters. It's a very different and unique performance. And so I kind of like the sort of like at the beginning where he was lost and aimless, but he had that sort of like cockiness that a young person who sort of thinks they're invincible has. And then in the middle chapter, when he actually kind of has that invincibility, he really settles into a quiet confidence. And then the last chapter is just such confusion, and he doesn't know what his place in the world is and anything else that's going on. And so I think he was able to perform in all 3 chapters very distinct ways that I really appreciate it. We're very often, when you get these types of movies that cover a large swath of time, you just basically get the actor doing the same note the whole time and they don't really change. And I think he does a really good job in this performance to sort of highlight the differences in the way that he was feeling. So I really sort of commend that aspect of the film.
And I read an article, I wish I knew if it was, I'm not even going to guess which outlet it came from, but there was a review that was talking about this movie, about how some of the more classic Yakuza films from, say, the 60s and the 70s, and there's some, some really classic ones, they were, they kind of glamorized the Yakuza a little bit, but it was always a way of putting down the Yakuza. Like, it was never something that you would strive to be a member. Like, I kind of think in the West, sometimes we think being a gangster is kind of cool. Like I grew up that way anyways. I thought it would be kind of cool to be in like a gang or something like that.
That girl.
That probably just is more about me than anything else. But they were talking about how in this movie, it's almost like the director missed the memo there, that like, you're not supposed to paint Yakuza into a sympathetic role, which, I mean, you do kind of feel bad for him at the end of the movie, even though he's done terrible things and he's been a part of terrible things. But you do kind of feel bad for him, and you do feel a lot of compassion and empathy for the discrimination he faces. And so I thought that was interesting, like just in terms of context of Yakuza movies from, say, the 60s, 70s to present day. I thought it's an interesting change. And I mean, I don't know, Naomi, I don't know if you can speak to, the perception of Yakuza movies or like Yakuza in general in Japan. But, I found that to be a really interesting point that individual wrote.
That's interesting, because Yakuza right now, I don't know too much, but my hometown Kobe is known for this one of the biggest Yakuza family, Yamaguchi-gumi, and Kobe had a big earthquake in 1995, and actually Yakuza helped the people out. Like, they made food and they give out food to people who, lost their home or whatever. So I grew up hearing like, oh yeah, like the lower ends, like real typical gangster Yakuzas are like assholes and whatever, but upper class or people who are in upper hierarchy, I can't say that word, do know how to take care of the town and whatever. But I know how the law has changed, and I actually have a friend who's married to a policeman in Osaka, and Osaka is filled with Yakuza, and he had to go into one of the Yakuza's home, and he's a sweetheart. He's a very calm, kind guy, but he had to intimidate them so hard that you can't tell the differences between actual Yakuzas and the police officers. Wow. And apparently, like, he was horrified and everything. So, but there's definitely still glamorization of Yakuza. There's a huge game franchise called Yakuza, Ryuga Gotoku in Japanese, that's still really popular. I'm actually a huge fan, which is about this Yakuza who's not really a Yakuza, but like grew up Yakuza and wants to be Yakuza. It's a whole new story, but it's a complicated story, and it depends on where you live, because in Kobe and Osaka, there's definitely kind perception, glamorization happening for Yakuza. So it's a tough thing to clarify.
Yeah, that's something I think they do a really interesting job of showing in this film, at least, how most of society either is completely indifferent to it or it's just about the worst thing in the world, where in the third chapter, the woman he sort of starts to see from his youth ends up losing her job because of a few different things, but one of them being the fact that she's associating with an ex-Yakuza member, and it would bring shame upon the company for her to work there, sort of thing. And so she no longer works there. But then, I've also heard stories about how, as a Canadian, I've got 2 tattoos on my wrist. I wouldn't be allowed in something like a bathhouse or something like that because of the affiliation of gang tattoos. Yeah. In this, there's like a scene of a guy with full Yakuza tattoos being in a bathhouse, sort of thing, which obviously means that bathhouse is okay with it, probably because they're paying for protection or whatever the situation would be. But yeah, it's just such an interesting dichotomy between what parts of society are okay with it and what parts of society are not.
Can I actually bring one thing? Fun fact about Yakuza. Again, in Kobe, Yamaguchi-gumi family has the main house, and it was actually close to my high school. And my friend heard that, was it Halloween? Yeah, actually in Halloween, they give out candies to kids. So she was like, Naomi, do you want to go? And I was like, no, I don't want to get killed. But apparently, like, kids in that neighborhood dress up and went to this house of the biggest Yakuza family in Japan and got candies from those Yakuza members. And it's a huge thing, apparently.
Are they like the full chocolate bar family?
I was going to say, Dakota. Like, this is going to be the house on the block that gives the best candy, like the high-end candy. They're not giving out apples and toothbrushes.
No.
These guys are doing, like, the good stuff. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's so interesting, though. I wonder if they do that because of, like, it's like a PR stunt in a way. You know what I mean? Like, they're just trying to not face that discrimination and to be able to live within the society however they can, basically. That's really interesting, though.
Yeah.
I almost sort of equate it with like hearing stories about like people like Pablo Escobar back, in Colombia.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Giving money and supporting all the local programs and meal programs and all that sort of stuff, giving out gifts and free money. One, because, goodwill in your community is good. But then the flip side is like when the cops come up and they're like, hey, did you see anything? And they're all like, nope, didn't see anything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
100%. And like what Naomi was saying about the Yamaguchi-gumi, from what I read in the news too, they reacted quicker in terms of the relief efforts for like the hurricane than the Japanese government did. Huh. So the Japanese government wasn't even doing anything yet, and yet the local Yakuza was the one that was actually making a difference in the neighborhood.
Yeah. I actually have this guy from my neighborhood back in elementary school. He was so nice to me. I loved him. I happened to move, so I lost contact with him, but he joined Yamaguchi-gumi, so I should probably reach out to him and be like, yo, are you alive? Like, how many fingers you got left and what kind of things you do? And, figure out Yamaguchi.
What kind of candy do they give out at Halloween?
Yo, very important question.
I'm super curious what they're giving out.
Clearly,
chocolate bars.
Actually, I would like to know in Japan, what are they giving out for Halloween? Because it's probably better than what we get. So
yeah, I will try and find him and ask him that question. I got you.
Halloween question first, and then how are
the
you?
Rest, yeah.
How are you is after. That's a far second. That's a far second.
All right, so we're going to talk about the next movie, which is one called Hope. This is one that I did not see. So, Rachel, if you want to kind of give a brief plot description, and then you and Naomi can talk about it a little bit.
幸せな毎日がずっと続くと信じていた。
出かけるの？
ちょっと。息子が姿を消したその日までは。
Sure. Hope was a movie. It's kind of put out there as a police procedural movie where there's a murder that happens and then of a young individual, and there's kind of a hunt for who was the murderer. But the difference with this movie, and the thing that I actually found the most compelling, was that the focus of the film is not on the police chase. It's not on the detective story whatsoever. It's on the family of a young man who may or may not have been involved. So they don't know until the end whether or not was he the murderer, is he another victim, what had happened to him. And it's about a family. It's a very kind of middle class father who's an architect, mother works in publishing. He has a younger sister who's in high school or about to go into high school. So they're just like a normal kind of Japanese family that you wouldn't expect anything negative from, I suppose the best way to say it. And then when their son goes missing and potentially is wrapped into a murder that happened, the film focuses on the responses of each member of the family. So for me in particular, I found the interesting bit between the mother and the father, where the mom was like, as long as he's alive, it's okay. Even if he's a murderer, it's fine. Like, we're going to deal with this. Like, he's my son, and my son is my son, and I love him unconditionally. And the father is a bit more reserved. The father is a bit more, let's see what happens. Like, let's before we react, let's find out what actually happened. Which kind of leads, and then the mother at some point accuses the father even of saying, like, you kind of just wish he was dead, don't you? So I really enjoyed the movie. I thought it was I love a police procedural, by the way. I'm a huge fan of detective stories, books, movies, TV shows, all that stuff. I love those things. But I thought this was such an interesting take on it. It's based off of a popular Japanese novel. And so clearly it's like, I think it worked really well as a movie. Naomi, what did you think about it?
I didn't like it that much because of various reasons. But one, camera work was horrendous. I did not like the flashbacks. And do you remember the scene where mom was talking to a reporter who tried to get information, family information, secrets from the mom in exchange of information that he has? And there was this weird twist and turns, and I was just like, what are you doing? This is not a TV show, it's a movie. It looked cheap. And it shows family dynamics and how Japanese patriarchy is set in the household. So to see that father just kind of taking control of everything a bit too much, being that patriarchy, the representation of patriarchy, it was just a bit too much for me. But it made me cry at one of the funeral scenes, and I was not expecting that. So I have to give them applause for making me cry.
It's a very emotional movie that I think even if your family didn't go through something like that, which I would think the majority of families haven't gone through something like that, whenever there's a family trauma or situation that you have to deal with, seeing how a mom and a dad can break down because of something to do with their kids, I think that's very emotionally affecting, which is probably why you cried. I got pretty emotional about that one too, although I think the lunch ladies in the school meals one, that made me more upset.
We love the lunch ladies.
Don't know why. But no, in this one, I think in terms of the camera work, actually, I'm going to defend them on one thing. I agree with you about kind of the cheap, back and forth. I know exactly what you're talking about. And also I want to say that whole subplot with the tabloid journalist, I was not having that. I was like, this is so useless. And
I know,
I think I get what his purpose is because he's driving the plot forward in many ways, but I wasn't really about that one. But I did in terms of the camera work, I really liked how warm the movie was. And this is simply in contrast to what typical police procedures are, which is really cold. They use a cold color palette because that's the color palettes usually of a prison or a police station. It's usually blues and greens and whites. But this movie, they flood it with tons of oranges and reds and stuff like that. And not to say that you should like a movie because of cinematography, but I'm just saying it was something that it stuck out to me as something that I personally really took from this movie, and I really liked it. I'm with you though. It's not a perfect movie. It's got quite a few different plot holes and some things that are a little uneven here or there. But in general, though, I personally really liked it. It might be also just because what I'm expecting kind of going into it, reading about when I read the synopsis of it, I thought it was going to be like just a detective story, and it ends up being something completely different, which I enjoyed. But I also thought, because between the 3 movies that I watched, 2 of them were quite heavy, and I wasn't really expecting that. I thought this one would be a bit more of like a thriller, so I thought it'd be good, but it ended up being a lot heavier than I expected it to be.
That's fair. While watching it, this movie actually reminded me of American Son, because mostly the setting is in the house, or like they don't go out too far, right? It's like they revisit the scene, so you get familiar with the scenes and you see the family conflict and dynamics. But I liked American Son a bit too much, so just like, this does not hold candles. Is that the saying? So, but I have to say that acting was pretty good. The main 2, the mom and dad. So mom is Ishikawa Yuriko, powerhouse, and dad Tsutsumi Shinichi, again another powerhouse. They did a good job. And my personal favorite is Miyabi, the sister.
She was so good. She was so good in this. Yeah, unbelievably good.
Yeah, the dilemma of, like, I don't know what to believe. Like, my parents have different opinions and my brother's missing and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, she's that good girl who's trying to get into a good high school and she wants to have a future. And that seems like it's being taken away from her because of her brother's action and how the society is reacting to it, right? So I understand her frustration, and the actor did an amazing job portraying it.
Yeah, and she really does well of the kind of the very stereotypical, you're the younger daughter of a family with an older brother, and in like a lot of Asian families. I'm saying this as a younger sister with an older brother in an Asian family. Like, some of the times we feel a little ignored. We feel like growing up, you kind of feel like there is a preference to your brother, because I think like it's so ingrained in particularly East Asian culture, but I think in a lot of cultures around the world, like the son is the one, he carries on the family name. And I mean, and like kind of even going further than that, like long time ago, they were like the laborers and you were just, there to be sold to another family as like a wife. Like, so the dynamic between siblings, not to say that my family thought that about me, by the way, they didn't try to sell me off or anything like that, but it's just like, it's one of these things that's traditionally, it's so ingrained in East Asian culture that, the eldest son in the family carries a lot of weight. Even if they're a screw up, like the son is in this one, he's not, he appears to be a screw up. I should say that he isn't a screw up, but he appears to be a screw up. And even as a screw up, they end up taking most of the focus. And so I thought, you're right. The actress who played the younger sister, she was so good. Like, she kind of like hit the nail on the head, like perfectly, of someone who obviously cares about what's going on with her brother, but she also has her own life. And she's kind of like, I'm sick and tired of my brother always stealing my shine from me. But I thought that's a good point to like bring her up, because I thought she was amazing in it as well.
Yeah. And to see, like, so the family's in the spotlight because the reporters and the police and the surrounding communities and the business partner and everyone's like, did your son do this or not? Is your son involved or not? And they get their house egged and, they get surrounded by reporters all the time. So like, I know the mentality, the mob mentality, and the internet, plays a small part in this, saying like, yo, like this person's doing this, like, oh, there's this new information, like these people are dead, like this family is horrible, blah, blah, blah. So it was really grounding in that sense. It was really real. And I felt bad for the family. And I think that part, the emotional portrayal of having sympathy for the family, I think the film did a good job.
Completely agree with that. Yeah, for sure. And I think, I mean, even a family, we didn't really talk about that, but just bring it back to that. They have a moment of talking about social media. I think it was Facebook in particular that they're using that. And sometimes it can be a little distracting with movies trying to add in social media or internet elements in general. Not every movie is able to do it well, but I think in Hope, they translate it well, because it would be almost unrealistic if you set it in contemporary times and don't include some form of social media, and and it's tough to portray on screen without it being very distracting. But I actually thought they did a pretty good job on this one.
Awesome. I kind of wish I had time to see that one. I was trying to watch a bunch of them, and that one seemed interesting, but there's ones that kind of sound a little bit more interesting, and one that I regretted watching afterwards and not watching Hope. But that's besides the point. I do want to talk about one called Under the Open Sky, which is directed by Nishikawa Miwa.
相手にしない方がいいんじゃないですか？放送に耐えられる対象じゃないですよ。そこが面白いんじゃん。
下町で暮らす優しくてまっすぐすぎるこの男、三上。実は人生の大半を刑務所で過ごした元殺人犯だった。
And this was my favorite movie that I saw in the festival. It actually played at TIFF last year, which is very interesting. So kind of like a family where that movie sort of shows the entire life of a young man going through the Yakuza system and then going to jail and coming out the other side. This movie starts with a Yakuza member leaving jail. And so it's literally the entire story is him about trying to acclimatize back in society. And so he's a little bit older. The actor who plays him is, I really hope I say this correctly, Yakusho Koji, who is a very famous Japanese actor.
A+ on the pronunciation.
A+?
Yep, you got it right.
Oh, awesome. Great. Yeah. So we actually saw one of his movies, Rachel, when we talked about celebrating Asian cinema, which was Memoirs of a Geisha. He's in that. Mm-hmm. He's one of the older gentlemen that has like the heavy scarring on his face.
Yeah. He's a very famous actor in Japan, though, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
incredibly famous. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's also been in other movies like Babel, so he's definitely known to North American audiences as well. But he's basically sort of, I keep sort of relating it to The Irishman, a movie that I really don't care for at all. Really.
Same. I didn't like it that much, but it is very applicable to some of these movies.
It's just such an easy reference point as far as like dealing with the rise and fall of being in a mob or a gang or something like that. And so Under the Blue Sky is very similar, where it's about this elderly man coming out of prison, and he really doesn't have any sort of marketable skills to get himself a job. And as kind of discussed in the family, it's very difficult for people that are former Yakuza members to reintegrate into society. I think that's actually a very interesting sort of bigger conversation where, most of us will look at Japan or different countries and be like, wow, you're so different from places like America. But then in some regards, like the way that ex-prisoners are treated, it seems very identical to America in this idea of once you sort of commit a crime, you don't get sent to jail to rehabilitate, to get better. It's just there as punishment. And when you're out, we're not there to help you either as a society. And so it just seems to push people directly right back into whatever crimes that they were committing before, because that's the only thing that they know, the only way they know how to make money, and they go right back into jail. And it sort of seems that's the same way. And sort of Under the Blue Sky really is him tackling how difficult it is to get his life back on track, where, the welfare agent who's helping him basically has to kind of do it secretly because they're not really supposed to be helping ex-Yakuza people, because that's sort of against the code, not against the law. That's not what they really do. That's not what their purpose is there for. And so I think they do a really good job of this man who clearly is trying his hardest to do it, but at the same time, someone who's always had a lot of anger in his life, because the other main point of the story is he's trying to reconnect with his mother, who gave him up at age 4. And so he's had this huge resentment to authority figures and any parental figures his entire life. And I really like that he's got this sort of simmering anger underneath him. And like when he's at the DMV and he's like trying to figure out how to get his license back, and he like just unloads on this DMV worker, and he immediately apologizes, but that anger is always there. He's always carrying that. It's unfortunately not a badge of honor. It's a badge of shame that he has to carry with him. And the fact that he constantly has to navigate these hurdles really sort of highlights the sort of injustices that communities as a whole everywhere around the world really do not do a good enough job of making sure that people, when they're trying to reintegrate with society, are able to do it at a seamless way. there's obviously needs to be some restrictions depending on what crimes you committed and things like that. Like you can't own firearms or you can't live right next to a school depending on what crime you committed, things like that. But things like being able to get a job and being able to get benefits and support programs and education, all that sort of stuff clearly is not there. And I think this movie does a really great job of highlighting those inequities. And I'm not too sure if Naomi, you're also able to kind of speak about any sort of society issues in that regards or not.
I definitely agree. Prison system in Japan is, well, not just prison system. Like when you're incarcerated, you will be forever a criminal. There's no redemption. There's no saving. And it's really tough. Not even just for Yakuza, anyone who got incarcerated. And unlike here, I don't think there are that many organizations who openly support or offer support to those who were incarcerated and want to go back to, being a member of society. I think it's just Japan's like, well, you commit crime, you're no longer one of us, you're no longer a citizen. And that kind of goes to, that could be said to Yakuzas, right? Like you're no longer a group, this part of the society. You're no longer a normal people, regular people. And that barrier cannot be easily broken there. So yeah, like now I think I need to watch this film like right after this because it's Yakusho Koji. He's amazing and the topic sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it was a really beautiful and delicate performance and one that got me emotional a few times throughout it, and it's got a very beautiful ending, and it's just such a nice, beautiful, poetic film. Like looking at different categories of the festival, and this one like sort of jumps out. You're like, oh, it's a Yakuza movie, and like, oh, cool, interesting, and like expecting your typical Martin Scorsese gang mob style movie, but it really wasn't. It really was a drama about one man trying to get his life back on track and figure out what his place in the world is, and that's something that I really appreciated. And there's at parts some very funny moments as well, where he tries to like intimidate some people by like bringing back his old persona. And like, clearly this is a man that like has trouble walking. He's got really bad knees. he usually would not scare anyone, but as soon as, you say like, oh, I'm ex-Yakuza, that kind of like makes everyone sort of shake in their boots a little bit.
I love that the two Yakuza movies that we saw, they weren't about the violence, like you said, like they're not a shoot 'em up kind of Scorsese kind of movie. Not to say I love those movies too, but I like that they focus more on kind of the mortality of the people who are committing these things, and not to put compassion on people who do terrible things like that, but I think it's such a unique way of looking at the gangster, from wherever in the world. Like I think it's a really cool way into the story, and in many ways, like if you want to look at film as something to like mold the younger generation, well, they can see like it's not all that it cracks up to be when you do watch a Martin Scorsese or like a John Woo movie. It's not always going to be the cool, shoot 'em up, assassin, Jiao Fat kind of thing. But yeah, and one thing I actually want to say about The Prisoner, because that's actually a topic that I'm personally really interested in my life and in my career. It's rights for prisoners. It's a very difficult thing somehow for societies to understand the concept of rehabilitation as opposed to punishment. You can look at countries within the Scandinavian part of the world. They're much better at it, and their like re-imprison rates, if you want to call it that, people who like commit crimes again and have to go back into the system, is actually quite low, especially compared to other countries. So I it's really cool. This was a movie that I wanted to watch. That was really on my radar and I want to watch, but I think when I went to go watch it, it wasn't available to watch yet. So then it got kicked off. Yeah, I don't know why. But then, things just got busy. But yeah, I'm definitely going to see if I can try to catch up with it maybe this weekend, because I think it's on tomorrow. Day.
Well, if I was able to give an award for best actor, or best performance, I would definitely give it to Koji here. And as far as best film, it was my best film, my favorite of them all as well. Naomi, I know you watched one other movie as well. I don't know if you want to briefly talk about the one that you did see.
Yeah, so I watched a film called The Cornered Mouse Dreams of Cheese, Kyuso wa Cheese no Yume o Miru, directed by Isao Yukisada. It's actually a queer film. It's about these two men. One is comfortable with his sexuality of being gay. I think he's gay. I don't think he's bi. And the other one who thought that he was heterosexual, but reuniting with the one. Okay, so I'm gonna. Sorry. So Imagase is the gay one, and Otomo, he's the main character. Otomo thinks that he's heterosexual. He has only been in heterosexual relationships, but because he cheated on his wife, and Imagase actually is a PI and have the record of it, Imagase uses that as a leverage to kind of have a physical relationship with him, which itself is I'm not a fan of. No means no. Consent is important. Don't blackmail no one. But Otomo kind of gets comfortable with the idea of being in a relationship, Imagase. And I love queer film, and in Japan, same-sex marriage is still not legal. There's still stigma against the LGBTQ plus community, especially the trans community. It's getting a bit better compared to when I was still there. So to see a queer film celebrated and loved in Japan, I know that this film did pretty well in Japan, and to see as a lineup, at TJFF, I was so happy. So I was so excited. The film itself, I realized that I actually don't really care about romance, whether it's heterosexual or, homosexual or whatever. So I was just like, okay, cool. And acting wasn't that great. Narita Ryo, who played Imagase, was okay, but everyone else was kind of stiff. Acting was not great, and lighting was that cheap Japanese kind of not necessarily low budget, but obviously films don't have big budget kind of lighting that I always have an issue with. So yeah, and if the film itself, the storyline's kind of clear. You kind of can't figure out what's going to happen in the end, but it felt like it was dragging on and on, despite the fact that scenes kind of move on quickly. So I don't think it was paced correctly, and it kind of put too much elements in it. It focuses on Otomo's relationships a bit too heavily. So it wasn't the best. It didn't kind of live up the expectation that I had, but at the same time, to see two big actors, Okura Tadayoshi and Narita Ryo, having this queer, homosexual sex and whatever, I was like, yes, you do you. Go queer films in Japan. So I was happy that I saw it. I wouldn't recommend it to everyone, but I was so happy about it.
What's the state of queer cinema in Japan? Actually, that's an interesting topic, because I know Japan is, typically, like you said, same-sex marriage is not, it's not recognized in Japan, although in most of East Asia, it's still not. I think Taiwan is the only country that's actually legalized it. But in terms of queer cinema, is it popular? Does it do well? You said that this film did pretty well in Japan.
I think this film is the most well-received one. I can't actually really think of queer films. In the recent years, it's happening. I think there's a Netflix original called Kanojo, or Anoko wa Kizoku. I forgot which one was it, but it's about lesbians. Apparently it was received well, so it's definitely recognized, but kind of within the LGBTQ plus and ally community. So if you are a heterosexual in Japan, who don't really have, LGBTQ plus community ties, you wouldn't go out and watch films. But one of the reasons that this film did well was because they got those popular actors among, young women and whatever. So I think the marketing was smart with this film. But the queer film, I need to get into it, and I hope they do well and get recognized within Japan and outside of Japan.
I like the irony of choosing two young, like, good-looking actors that appeal to young women.
I know.
Into a homosexual relationship. I enjoy that. That's great.
Right. But there's this scene that Otomo, the one with the heterosexual relationships, he went to a gay club, and it was that stereotypical gays, like, that were only in the bar. And I was just like, oh God, they're stereotyping gays. It's like, okay, whatever. But they portrayed gay in a big screen cinema in Japan. So you know what? I have to give them points for that.
Kind of stuff. I mean, even if you look in Hollywood films, like, only, I'd say, even now, there's not that many queer films that are available, but, like, there were, kind of, when you look at the transition of them, there were little, and then they weren't that great yet, and they were probably very offensive and stereotypical for the time, like, when we look back on it now. But it's just about kind of putting it out there in a way that maybe mainstream audiences can absorb it first and can accept it. And then as you get going, I mean, you could say this for any, group, basically. Like, if you think of like Black actors in America, they were always relegated to the roles of, like, piano players, the maids, the butlers, and then, not to say it was right, it wasn't right then, it's not right today, but it progresses that way. It's never just 0 to 100, right? You kind of have to take some steps. So I think that's really cool that to be honest, I didn't see this film listed, so I had no idea. Like, it's actually surprising to me that there is queer cinema in Japan, just because Japan has a reputation for being quite a conservative culture.
Which is weird, because kabuki and, like, other major things, like, they kind of relied on queer people, and queer, like, homosexuality was widely accepted, like, way back, like, around 1600s. And with the arrival of Christianity, they were like, oh, homosexuality, bad, woohoo. So it's the irony. But yeah, I really hope that queer films get more recognition and popularity in Japan. I genuinely wish them luck, and I want to support them.
And hopefully too, like, all over the world. I mean, I know, like, Hollywood doesn't have that many yet, to be honest. And it still feels like they're, when they do come out with one, it's very it's like the tagline is, hey guys, it's a queer film, go watch it. Like, as opposed to like, this is a really, beautiful movie about a relationship, or a really sad movie about a relationship, like, it's more of, guys, like, it's a queer movie, like, we did something, so go watch it. So it'd be nice all around the world if they could just kind of normalize every type of relationship, really.
That's why I really like Deadpool 2. Like, Deadpool 2 was not about queer film, but they just incorporated queer couple, like lesbian couples. And they were just like, here, like, they're just a couple. Deal with that kind of thing. I like that attitude. So
that's the hope, I feel like. I know we're getting a bit off track of TJFF now, but, like, I feel like that's kind of the hope of all different, like, traditionally underrepresented groups being in movies. It's like, it doesn't, like, I'm going to go really off the track now, Dakota, but we're going to talk about Soul. I remember seeing some people talk about Soul and how they were upset that the main character, like Jamie Foxx's character, his blackness wasn't played up more. And I was kind of, this is a really intense Reddit discussion that I had. And I was reading
Reddit.
I know. And me and, like, a bunch of other people were like, look, like, sometimes ethnic people, we don't want our ethnicity to be the story. Like, that's not necessarily how it is. Like, the character will be Black, will be Asian, will be gay, just because that's what the character is. You don't need to play up, certain traits and things like that. So I think it's cool, the more that we get more of those stories on TV and movies, the more that they can just be normal. And like you said, like, they just exist, like in Deadpool 2. It doesn't need to be a ticket sale. Like, it doesn't need to be something to drive you to, like, a clickbait kind of ticket. Like, hey guys, go check that one out.
For sure. Hopefully we will reach that stage soon.
Well, this is why I was so excited about having Naomi on with Rachel, because I've had both of you on a bunch of times, but you've never been on at the same time. But that was, like, some terrific conversation. I'm so happy I got to listen to you two both talk.
We could do this for hours, Dakota.
Yeah.
We could just keep talking.
Rachel, I know you can.
I can keep a conversation going for ages. It's great.
Yeah.
Now, before we start bringing up any more obscure films that have nothing else to do with the festival, I think we'll try to wrap it up a little bit here. If we have any parting thoughts, I think I have a parting question for you, Naomi, is going back to kind of the quality of the festival, what have you. I know when I was asking for recommendations way back when this festival was announced, I'm sort of curious, now that you've kind of like had a chance to kind of go through all the different titles, is this like a good representation of like modern Japanese contemporary cinema as far as the different filmmakers involved, the different actors that are involved, the sort of stuff that might not necessarily be, you know, the number one at the box office, but definitely movies that you could sort of fairly easily see?
Oh, absolutely. Like it has, you know, kind of cheesy comedy movies like The School Meals Time, and I love the variety. Like it's for everyone, just casual film viewer who's interested in non-North American films, and for hardcore Japanese film fans, and just, you know, weeaboos who just are obsessed with Japan. They can watch you know, from Today It's My Turn, those comic based film adaptation ones. So I really do think that the selection is fantastic. They do a great representation of Japanese cinema and its, you know, industry as a whole. So I really need to give TJFF a huge thumbs up. Like I'm giving thumbs up like right now towards the head office's direction.
Awesome. Well, that makes me very happy to hear. Rachel, do you have any final parting thoughts on the festival itself?
I really enjoy it. And I'm kind of disappointed in myself for not having known about it sooner, because it's a great festival. I like being able to watch movies, like Naomi said, outside of North America. It's hard enough finding Canadian movies in Canada. So it's great to have a place that you can watch movies that I probably wouldn't have watched otherwise, not because I'm against them, but just they just don't come under your radar. So I was really appreciative of this festival for existing in the first place. Disappointed in myself for not knowing about it sooner, and hopefully next year they do like in-person viewings, because I would be so down. Naomi, we can go. It would be
yes, let's go together.
It'll be amazing. We don't need Dakota. We can just go.
Yeah. Bye.
No, we could I love it. Like I think it's great, and it made me curious actually about like the different film festivals we do, because like Dakota said, like there's a lot of film festivals that happen in Canada, in Toronto, and so it made me curious about like what other countries, what other groups have film festivals that are based out of Toronto or out of Canada that we can watch, because it's a great way to kind of dive headfirst into a world of cinema that we wouldn't normally get to see.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, and a nice little bow on this episode. Naomi, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. You really brought a lot to the table and really helped contextualize a lot of these movies for Rachel and I. So we're both really appreciative of what you were able to bring to the show. But I want to know, where can people follow you and your work?
So people can find me at Naomi Wada Platt on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube's the same name. I have English channel and Japanese channel. I talk about films. I talk about politics, feminism in North America and Japan, LGBTQ rights as well. So just come find me. And thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun talking to you too. I learned a lot from you too today. So thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome anytime to come back on the show. I'm going to make sure to link to all of your work in the show notes so people can find that as well. Rachel, where can listeners find more of your work?
I'm going to give a shout out actually to Exclaim, just because they were the ones who got me the press pass to do TJFF, and I wrote a few reviews on their website, and some other contributors have put up some reviews too for other movies that we didn't talk about. So you can go to Exclaim.ca and check out their film section and their music section. It's great. And if you want to look for me personally, you can find me on Twitter _RachelKH.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'll also include links to the Exclaim reviews as well. You can follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at ContraZoomPod. And if anyone listening watched any films during the Toronto Japanese Film Festival, let us know your thoughts. Send an email to ContraZoomPod@gmail.com. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music, and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you could rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts, it'll be a huge help for us to grow and find new listeners. Thanks for listening.